Batra Daf Zayin Amud Bet. 3 lines from the top. Tashma. We'll bring another proof against Ula. Ilan mixato bechutz laaretz. If you have a tree that's partly inside Eretz Yisrael, partly outside Eretz Yisrael, tevel v'chulin mu'arevin ze bazeh. The fruits are considered tevel, which means fruits that are chayav maaser, and also considered non-fruits mixed within each other. Divrei Rabbi, it's according to Rabbi. Rashbag says, Haggadah b'chiyuv chayav, haggadah b'tur. Any fruits that grew on top of or inside the land of Eretz Yisrael is chayav. Any fruits that grew outside is not. So now the Gemara says, "Ad kan the only time the machlok between Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is the Morsafa Yesh Breda, or Morsafa in Breda. They hold there's a concept of Breda. Breda means a retroactive determination, right? So basically, can we determine what part of the tree is growing is in which part is grabbing nutrients from not it or not? So according to Rabbi, he says no, you can't determine which part of the tree is getting nutrients from inside or outside of Israel. Therefore, it's all considered mixed. Rashbag says yes, the tree that's outside is getting fruits from that, is getting nutrients from the outside, and the part of the fruits that are inside are getting from the inside. However, everybody would agree that if it's, let's say, the entire tree is outside the land, it would all be for sure be patur. Seemingly that even if it's within 16 amot of Eretz Israel, it would still be considered outside of Israel. Question against Ula, who said that fruits are considered going according to the 16 amot. And over here, according to Ula, then that means if it's outside Eretz Israel, but its roots go into Eretz Israel within the first 16 amot, it should still be chayav. But here the case is there's a border underneath the tree that has a rock. The rock is a solid piece of rock underneath the border, and therefore the roots of the tree are separating above this rock. So the roots of the tree on the right side, let's say outside Israel, roots are going outside Israel, and therefore the fruits above that. And the roots on the left side of the tree going into Israel are separated by this rock in the center. And therefore, because the roots are separated, Ula's halakha does not apply. So that's the case if it's separated. Why would Rabbi hold that it's separate? Remember, said the Hadri Aravi. He holds, and it might be true that the roots are dragging nutrients from each side, but he holds that the nutrients get mixed inside the trunk, and then therefore the tree is considered mixed automatically for the fruits. Gemara says, was the machloket based off of? Therefore, the machloket is that Rabbi must hold that the trunk mixes everything together, and therefore it's mixed, and Rabbi Shbag holds that each side grabs nutrients from the roots side, and that's why it is separate. The Gemara sounds like Ula said that it's 16 amot is the measurement. For my tree, 16 amot outward is where my nutrients grab. But the problem is, person must distance his tree 25 amot from your friend's pit. So we see, so and therefore we see that roots go farther than 16 amot. The Gemara says no. Yes, roots can go much farther, more than 16, more than 25 amot. However, the 16 amot measurement that Ula gave is referring to how much does the nutrients grab. The grabbing of the nutrients are within the first 16 amot of the tree. After 16 amot, those roots are not meant for grabbing nutrients, but rather they are there just for stabilization of the tree, and therefore Ula's halakha still applies. They asked the question of Yochanan. He said, you have a tree that's within 16 amot of your neighbor's property. Amalei, he says, Gazlan hu ve'en mivin bikurim, you can't bring the bikurim. Proof according to Ula. Where it says, he holds that whether or not a tree is planted near your neighbor's boundary, within 16 amot, or the branches hang over, maybe he could still bring. Because he holds that Yeshua divided Eretz Yisrael to everybody with this understanding that it's okay to have roots or trees nearby. New Mishnah. If someone's trees hang over someone else's field. So if your field is being bothered by your neighbor's tree that's hanging over, you can cut the height for a person to be standing and raising his like a stick to hit the oxen on the plow, however big that is. In the case of a carob or a sycamore tree, those very thick trees, you can do on the plumb line. Plumb line is like a stick with a weight, but basically you can cut straight down and cut the tree in half if you want to. If it's whatever is above your property, you can cut off, no problem. But also an irrigated field, you can cut all the branches along the line of the plumb line, also straight down. You don't have to measure a certain height above it. You could just cut completely. Abba says, "Kol ilan sirak keneged hameshkolet." All non-fruit trees you can cut with the plumb line, straight across. So now, the question is about Shul, the Gemara is going to ask right now is, where is Abba Shul coming from? The first part of the Mishnah said that Tanakama held that all trees where the branches are hanging over, you can cut to raise your stick to hit the oxen. And then the Tanakama mentioned that only the carob and sycamore trees you can use the plumb line across the board. Abba Shul then might say that all barren trees can be cut, not only the carob and sycamore trees. However, the second part of the Mishnah that said the irrigated fields, for example, so Tanakh mentioned all fields, all trees, and Abba Shul will then come say that only the barren trees, but fruit trees can still only be cut with the height. Right? So did Abba Shul come to the first part of the Mishnah and included all trees, or Abba Shul came to the second part of the irrigated part of the Mishnah, the second case of the Mishnah, which is the irrigated field, and he limited the Mishnah. So the first part of the Mishnah, if Abba Shul is saying all non-fruit trees, that means he's adding to the first part of the Mishnah, which only said carob and sycamore. And in the second part of the Mishnah, which said you can cut all trees, Abba Shul then might be coming to limit it and say no, only non-fruit trees. So which one is Abba Shul talking about? Clearly, we see by the irrigated field of Abba Shul says you can cut all trees because the shade is bad for the irrigated fields. Therefore, we see Abba Shul about the first case. We also prove from Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, all non-fruit trees you can cut. Makes sense according to the first part of the Mishnah. That's why he said all barren trees to include. The second case, ilan serak mi baile. Meaning, if Rabbi Shul was going in the second part, he should have, and he's excluding, right? We said that if it's going in the second part, Rabbi Shul was excluding. Therefore, he should have said barren trees may be cut. He shouldn't say all barren trees because he's not including anything. He's trying to limit the Mishnah. Therefore, from proving that Abba Shul came to include trees in the first part of the Mishnah, not good proof. If there's trees of a branch hanging over, branches of a tree hanging over a public property. You can cut off enough of the branches to create enough space for a camel and the rider to go underneath. You can cut enough space for the camel with its load of flax or whatever. As Rabbi Shimon says, you can all trees along the plumb line across the board, because we don't want tum'ah to travel. We'll explain. Who's the Mishnah who holds that regarding to potential damage, you can assess what's going now and not the future, right? Meaning our Mishnah seemingly says you can only cut for what you need now, and you don't have to cut for the future. We see this. We see in our Mishnah. But it's according to of the other. The Tanakh Mishnah says, "You cannot dig a hole underneath public property, not pits or ditches, etc., because you might cause the street to collapse." But the other, this is matir. This is mutar. As long as you make the roof of your hole, the top of the street, to be enough for the wagon with stones to travel above it. So even though that roof might eventually fall down. But the other holds that once, if you do what you need to do now, as long as it's viable, it's okay. Our Mishnah obviously goes like that. The Gemara says no. Even Hachamim who argue in that case may agree to our Mishnah because in the case of the roof, maybe the Mishnah Rabbanan disagreed with the over there because maybe you don't know when the roof can start falling apart. You don't want people to fall into sinkholes in the street. In our case, regarding the trees, maybe they would agree that you only cut what you needed, and the next time it grows back, just cut it again. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda said that you can cut the camel with the load. That's the question. Right? So whose height was higher? We said the first opinion was Hamim said the rider with the camel, the other person hold the camel with the load. Which one's higher? You see, it's obvious that Hachamim's amount is higher. Because if you think that Rabbi was higher, if you think that the the camel with the load is higher, then what would Hachamim do when Rida's amount is passing by? What would you do when a camel with the load is passing by if it's not high enough? Gemara says, what did you say? What would Rabbi do with Hachamim? What would Rabbi do when a man's riding? Gemara says, no, easily. It's easier to counter for the person, for the load and the camel, because if it's just a person and a camel and he needs to make space, just duck. But a load with the camel, you can't do anything about that. Okay. Regarding Tum'ah, you should cut all trees along the public property, like next to Avon J. Ocean Parkway by the cemetery. Tana the Britza says, because the branches might create a tent of Tum'ah, right? Ohel means there's branches hanging over one side or its roof, whatever it is, and it's over Tum'ah as well, and it could transfer over. So we're afraid that the Tum'ah might transfer over. Gemara says, Pshita, of course that's the reason. Since Mishnah says for its Tum'ah, of course it's referring to Ohel. The Gemara said, no, you might think that the Mishnah said, Tameh, maybe a crow can bring a piece of Tum'ah stuff and throw it on the branches, and then it could fall down on top of, and then it will cause tumah to be on top of someone. Therefore, what would you do? You don't have to cut the tree down branches completely. You could just thin out the branches so that tumah can't land on it. Therefore, Mashman teaches us that you have to be worried about the ohel of tumah, which means you should have to be careful and make sure that you cut the branches completely according to his opinion, so that if there's tumah on the other side, it won't transfer to Rosh Hashanah. New Perek, Hazkat Habatim, a Hazakah of houses. The Habarot Basehim pits, which is, and also like different types of caves, Vahashavachot or birdhouses, Bamana Hazaot bathhouses, Betabadin and olive presses, Ubatashalachin irrigated fields, Vabadim and slaves, Vahoshu Oseh Perot Hadir, or anything that has continuous benefits, Hazkatan Shaloshanim Biyam their Hazakah is day to day, which means it has to be shown that they're using it day to day. So hazakah, we're going to see in the right when I start talking, it's a concept that shows that if let's say you say I bought the property in general, you would need to bring a proof that you bought it, unless you don't have to bring proof if you have been shown to be acting like the homeowner for a certain amount of time. So right now we're saying this is 3 years usage. If it's a rainwater field, which doesn't require you to work it so hard, that hazakah is 3 years, but you don't need it to have 3 consecutive years of continuous usage because you don't need to. So how do you do hazakah? Rabbi Shmuel says, 3 months in the first year, 3 months in the second, last year, and the full year, 12 months in the middle. So 3 in the first, 3 at the end, and full 12 months in the second year. Which is 18 months. The Rebbe Akiva says 1 month in the first year, 1 month in the last year, 12 months in the middle, which is only 12, which is 14 months, sorry. You don't need 3 years, 36 months, because that is a seasonal type of idea. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, the Batra does apply regarding 18 months, Besdei Lavan regarding a grain field, Besdei Lavan regarding field of trees, as long as you gather in the grapefruit, the grape produce, whenever you pick the olives, and you bring in the dried figs. These count as 3 years, even though it's 1 year. The Gemara's Hidush is this is enough of harvesting of these type of trees in a single year that shows ownership. They don't need 3 full years, like we said earlier. Right. So the concept of 3 years is relative to the type of field you have. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shemati meholchei Usha, I heard from Usha, Sheyom they would say, Minan hazakah shashim, how do we know that a hazakah is 3 years? Mishor hamuad, from the concept of a muad ox. An ox, that's a bull, that's a muad, means it gores 3 times. It takes away the assumption, which means what? Mashor hamuad kevan shenagach shloshini yorot. Right? An ox in general we don't have to assume that it's going to gore. However, a mu'ad ox takes away the assumption that it's a non-goring animal, and now we assume it is going to gore. It makes the assumption that it's going to gore. It takes away the original status of a tam non-goring bull, and now we're in the status of a muad goring bull. So too regarding hazaka. Once a person used the property for 3 years, it leaves the possession of the previous owner, the seller. It now stands in the new possession of the buyer. That's the analogy that we're going to use. We're going to ask questions about it tomorrow. But that's the analogy. The analogy is that the same way we have by the bull. The bull was a regular Bessie, the bull, and all of a sudden, once it gored 3 times, we say, whoa, you got to be careful with this one. This is a goring bull. We no longer assume that it's not going to gore. We are now going to assume that its nature is to gore. So, to regarding property, the concept of Heskat Badim is that if you use the item for 3 years, you use the property for 3 years, we no longer assume that it belongs to Reuven, the seller. We now assume that it belongs to you, the guy who's been using it for 3 years. And now it's up to the other guy to prove it if you didn't buy it.